question is a combination from two of our clients, and they both have older horses that they love dearly, and that they just wanted some help and tips with weight gain and maintenance for the older horse, especially Roseanne talks about going into winter.
Yeah, this is a very popular, a common problem that people can have with older horses, where they start to lose a lot of weight and it starts to be difficult to maintain weights on the ones, 20 plus, 25, that sort of age range. They either come in skinny or fat, generally old horses. They're one or the other often. Obviously, the first with these guys is to make sure that there isn't actually some other health reason that's causing them to lose weight or be unable to maintain weight, particularly if it was a fairly sudden weight loss. Definitely always get your vet out and involved to check that out. Cushing's or PPID the onset is commonly happens in older horses, and so if you get a sudden loss of weight, particularly with sudden loss of top line, and there are obviously other symptoms of Cushing's, long hair, increased urination, propensity to laminitis, that sort of stuff, rule those out first is the first step. And also obviously teeth is the other big issue that we come across with older horses, where they start to be unable either to chew down with those front teeth, or the back teeth start having issues and they start quitting and spitting hay out. And if they can't get their food in well, they're not going to be able to absorb it well, and then you end up with weight loss. But to start with, I'll just assume that those two things are more or less, that their teeth are pretty good and that they don't have Cushing's, because Cushing's is a whole other topic again. But the first step, as with all horses of any kind, fat, thin, old, young, breeding, working, whatever, always need to make sure that they have enough forage. The horse's digestive system just doesn't work without enough forage. And so the first thing to think, if your horse is losing weight, if it's out on pasture, is there really enough pasture to be for the horse to really be eating enough? And if it's not on pasture, or you've got a mix of both, are you providing enough hay? Now, horses need about 2% of their body weight per day in forage. That's dried forage. So if you imagine you're feeding your horse totally on hay and you have a 500 kilo horse, they need to be eating about 10 kilos of hay per day at a minimum. Now, with an older horse with weight loss issues, I certainly wouldn't be restricting them. If they want to eat more than that, that's the first thing to let them do, basically. But the reason we see these older horses that are healthy but just starting to lose a little weight, the reason they start to lose a bit of weight is that the digestive efficiency starts to decline. They actually start to produce less of the digestive enzymes in the small intestine that they need to start digesting and absorbing simple things like sugars and proteins and some of the vitamins and minerals. That they do that in the stomach and the small intestine before it passes on to the hindgut, where they do a lot of fermentation. But in that first step, they start to lose the ability to absorb as many nutrients as they used to, and that's why you start to see the loss of condition and a loss of muscle mass along with that often, particularly if the horse has been retired and then there's not even there's no workload to keep the muscle mass up. So we need to look after the digestive system and often just provide them with just a little bit more of everything that used to maintain them, simply to make up for that lack of efficiency. So once you know that they have enough basic forage, the next thing to look at is to look at the quality of the forage. So this means considering adding a bit of high quality forage to the diet if that's not there already. By this I usually mean lucerne. Lucerne is an excellent source of protein, good quality protein, bioavailable calcium, and it is also pretty high in digestible energy or calories. So it ticks a whole lot of boxes, and it's forage. So it's good for the gut. It's got all this extra goodies in it. And it's actually, not only is it forage and good for the gut just by being forage, it also has a high level of pectins, which are actually used as a prebiotic type food by the hindgut bacteria. So it makes the hindgut bacteria happy, let's say.
Happy,
so
the good kind of probiotic.
Yeah, we want happy bacteria. So make sure there's a good amount of lucerne, but not too much in the diet. The base of the diet still needs to be good quality, but lower sugar, lower energy hay, but doesn't need to be extreme. extremely low sugar or extremely low energy if you've got a weight loss issue, but you don't want to be feeding them, you know, really sugary oat and hay or something at this point either, because that's just going to potentially set them up for other digestive problems. So once you've got enough forage and you've got a good high quality forage in there, then if you're still struggling, you can start to look at things like super fibers. So these are your beet pops, your speedy beet, fiber beet, lupin hulls, soy hulls as well, but I'm not that fond of soy, which I think I touch on in another question, so we'll leave that for the moment. But anyway, these super fibers are called super fibers because they're highly digestible. So they have the same sort of energy amount as oats, but without any of the associated detrimental effects that grains have. So they give you quite a good bang for your buck, but they're also healthy for the gut microbes again. So they act as a prebiotic, similar to the lucerne. So you get energy and a healthy gut. So that's a great start for your older horse. On this topic, it is sometimes worth considering probiotic supplements with the older guys, just to boost what they might be starting to lose in their older age. But it's not something that you'd necessarily need with all of them. It's just sort of, if you tried all this and you were still struggling, if you had any scouring issues or anything like that, it's certainly something to consider. And there's a ton of probiotic and other digestive supplements on the market, all of which have their place in some cases. Yeah, so that way you're getting a bit of an extra energy into the diet, and it's still gut friendly, basically. And the next step to think about is protein, because as I mentioned, a lot of older horses will start to lose muscle mass, and so that's simply because they can no longer absorb the proteins as well as they could when they were younger. So we simply, in most cases, just need to feed them a bit more protein. So whatever your favorite protein source is, mine generally is lucerne or lupins. Lupins definitely need to be crushed or extruded when they're older, just because, again, of the teeth issues, and you just want to make everything easier to digest for them. But they're both good quality sources of protein to add, and again, you're adding more calories there, so you should be starting to see some weight gain at this point. And then lastly, if you have done all that and the horse is just still ribby, and particularly if you're needing to build them back up, fat is your go-to. Fat is just pure calories, which we, try to avoid as ourselves often. But for all the horses that need it, it's just the perfect solution. There's no impact on digestion, presuming you introduce it slowly. There's no impact on metabolism. You're not going to risk causing any insulin issues or any complications with Cushing's if they do have Cushing's. The ideal is flaxseed because of its high omega-3 fatty acid content. But when you're talking about feeding, a cup of oil a day, flaxseed, particularly the stabilized flaxseed oils, start to begin quite expensive. So I find a good compromise is just rice bran oil. Yes, it's a bit higher in omega-6s, but if you've got some other sources of omega-3 in the diet, there really shouldn't be a big drama with that. And it actually also contains a plant sterol, which is a bit like a natural steroid. I don't like to use the word steroid, but it does help support the building up of muscle, which is really helpful with the older horses. So that's a great tip for them.
Sophie, just with the flaxseed, I've been told in the past that you should buy the flaxseed whole and then you should grind it up yourself for the oil beneficial.
Yep.
Oil. Is that something you recommend as well?
Look, I used to follow that line, and then I looked into human nutrition research, because I noticed that in the supermarket you can buy pre-ground flaxseed quite readily. And I thought, well, why can humans eat it and horses apparently can't? It turns out that ground flaxseed, if you just literally grind up the seed, it's actually stable. The omega-3 fatty acids are pretty stable for about 3 or 4 months at room temperature, particularly if you keep them fairly, in a closed container and away from sunlight. So I actually tell people now that you can I would recommend pre-grinding your own, or making sure that you know when they were ground. If you buy them off the shelf, they might have been ground a year ago, in which case it would have started to lose some omega-3 fatty acids. But yeah, it's a bit of a myth that you absolutely must be ground fresh. So If you happen to have power in your shed and you've got a little coffee grinder, then go for it. It's not that difficult, but you could grind up a week's worth if you're in a gist mill and add it to the feeds, and that should be absolutely fine. It's more a problem when you separate the oil from the meal. The oil by itself is very susceptible to being oxidized. So I think that's where the myths come from. Yeah. So the oil goes rancid really bad, but if you leave it with all the other components of the seed, they're sort of protective, and they protect the oils from going rancid, basically. Keeping it simple usually works better. So the last point is just to make sure that your horse, as much as we're just talking about condition here, it is still important to make sure they have balanced minerals, particularly the trace minerals, to make sure you're supporting the immune system, which is also starting to struggle a little with the aging process. Because if your horse is sort of fighting sort of subclinical chronic low-grade infections or inflammatory conditions, that's going to have an impact on how easily they can maintain condition as well. So that's the sort of the quick rundown. That's the things I tick off when I am thinking about what we're going to feed a skinny older horse.